Hey everybody, it's Andy Kushner, host of The Wedding Biz, brought to you by Party Slate, our title sponsor, the first website designed specifically for event professionals and venues. Check them out at partyslate.com. So on The Wedding Biz, I conduct in-depth and revealing interviews of icons of the weddings and event industry. And right now, I am really jazzed because I'm going to New York City again. Going to be interviewing celebrity stylist Michaela Erlanger. And a part 2 with destination planner Michelle Rago. Also a part 2 with iconic cake designer Sylvia Weinstock. Plus I get to have a dinner with her just to hang. That's going to be really fun. Also interviewing the amazing photographer Klang Gessel. So that's going to be quite a trip to New York City. Also got some really exciting business meetings. And then I'm going to be getting ready to go to Engage at Nizuc in Mexico in early December, where I'm going to be interviewing several people. And also, in the meantime, believe it or not, doing so much here, interviewing various industry pros from Europe and Australia. And that's going to include Alejandra Pupel. I hope I'm saying that right, Alejandra. She is huge in France as a planner out of Paris. And recently interviewed John Manuel Grima, who is the premier floral designer out of Australia. So yeah, things are rocking. So if you missed last week's episode, it was with Rachel Berthesel of the Lake Como Wedding Planner out of Como, Italy. Rachel is just a wonderful, wonderful gifted planner and designer who not only works with clients directly, but also has the pleasure, as she says it, into morphing into the local team for many foreign agencies, such as planners in the States, like Lisa Vorsay and Chrissy Teigen and John Legend's wedding. She's worked with Colin Cowie and so many others. And so be sure to check that out if you missed it last week. Rachel is really great. And so today's interview is with a true icon, a true pioneer of the event industry, and that is Joe Goldblatt. Joe owned his own business, The Wonder Company, for 20 years before selling it. He has, you ready for this? This is just over the top. He has written, edited, or co-authored 38 books, including the first textbook in the event industry. He's had over 10,000 students in his teaching career, and ready for this one? He founded ISES, the International Special Events Society, now known as ILEA. He founded that organization, and he created the CSEP Program. Joe also started event management study at universities and developed curriculums. He is something else, so enjoy my conversation with Joe Goldblatt. Joe, I am so happy that you made the trip from Edinburgh just to be on this show. I am so honored. Thank you so much flying all the way here just for this. It means so much to me.
Well, you know, Andy, I had to come all this way. There's no such thing as telecommunications anymore, you know?
Right.
It would have been very hard to stretch that string all the way across the Atlantic Ocean.
That's right. Listen, both of us go somewhat far back. Not quite that far back, but a little back. But no, I know that you're here in Washington, D.C., and you were at NYU, you're speaking at GW, and that this is a real trip down memory lane. But talk about memory lane. Now, I read your book, The True Joy of Life, and I want to urge everyone to get it. It's a wonderful memoir, and we'll get into more of it in a moment. But you were at Woodstock in 1969, and no less with long hair.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I was in the festival and attending the festival that followed Woodstock. Immediately after Woodstock in 1969, the Texas International Pop Festival was held just outside of my hometown of Dallas, Texas. I was kind of an outsider at university. In Texas, if you weren't a football player or an athlete, you really weren't part of the in crowd. So I became a hippie. I had long hair. I had a knitted headband. I had a leather satchel with fringe, and I reeked of patchouli oil. And I told my parents...
Now, is that a code name for something else?
No, that came later.
Okay.
But the patchouli oil was a fragrance that all the hippies wore, very pungent. And I said to my father and mother that the next weekend I would be attending a pop festival, rock and roll festival. They didn't know what that meant because they were new at that time. They certainly didn't know who the stars were.
Yeah, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, you name it.
You name it. Yeah. Johnny Winter.
Joe Cocker.
All of them were there.
All of them, yeah.
And it was mind-blowing.
Yeah, I'll bet. And you were out there in the mud and everything, day after day. You did the whole thing.
I wasn't going to stay overnight. I was just going to go for the day because it was a new thing.
Yeah.
Pop festival, rock festival. I didn't know if it'd be safe. But then a group of other hippies adopted me.
Yeah.
And suddenly we were all cuddled up together in blankets and sleeping bags. And I'll never forget the ground thumping Andy to the sound of Janis Joplin and Joe Cocker and all the greats. And it might have been something that I imbibed or inhaled, but a few hours later, I was in a deep sleep. I woke up the next morning with a young lady's head on my shoulder, and she looked up at me with crystal blue eyes, and I thought, it doesn't get much better than this.
And yet you left it all to get into the event business.
That might have been one of the seminal moments, actually. I think the first moment that I knew I wanted to be in the events business was when my father, may he rest in peace, called me one day and said, Joe, I have to make a delivery in North Dallas of some alpine hats and decorations for an Oktoberfest party. Well, I didn't know what a German Oktoberfest was, but I got in Papa's lorry, his truck, and we drove to the wealthy man's home, a big estate. And in the back, there was a giant marquee that could hold easily 1,000 people, a tent. And we delivered the equipment. And the man said, would you like to stay for the party?
Oh.
I was 6 years old.
Oh.
I looked up at Papa. Papa nodded yes. We stayed in the shadows of the party. And I saw 1,000 people dancing to Oktoberfest, German beer hall music, having a Bavarian celebration, and literally experiencing the joie de vivre, the joy of living. And I think that was the first seed. And then it was probably cultivated when I attended events such as the Texas International Pop Festival.
Oh, wow. And obviously your love of music and show business, it's all related.
And the funny thing is, to this day, when I attend events, I have trouble being a guest. I'm always looking at crowd flow.
Oh, are you still doing that? You
ticketing,
can't control yourself?
Lighting, sound. I'm always thinking about it from a very specific, guest experience level.
Well, I'd like to ask, in the preface of your recent book release, The True Joy of Life, a memoir, you quote the playwright George Bernard Shaw, and you say, quote, I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the community, and as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I love that. What does that mean to you?
Well, that quote was first said by me at the second ever Special Events Conference, which was held in Palm Beach, Florida back in 1988. And that's where the seeds of the first umbrella organization for event professionals, the International Special Events Society, were sown. I was on a bus one evening coming back from a party at the Boca Raton Polo Grounds, and a friend seated next to me, Bob Graves, who owned a major party rental company in Philadelphia called Mainline Party Rental, turned to me and he said, Joe, this industry needs an umbrella association, and you're the one to start it. And I said, how do you know we need one, Bob? He said, Joe, look over your shoulder. Now, we were on the front row seats of the coach, the bus. And behind me, Andy, there was a caterer, a disc jockey, an entertainment professional, a security professional, a decor professional, a florist, and on and on. And it occurred to me, we were all facing forward and going in the same direction. And I thought, if we could start an organization like that, there would be no end in sight. And that quote from George Bernard Shaw, I said at the opening keynote speech at that conference, because I truly believe that one's life is not for self-interest. It's for the community. And that I've been fortunate in my life to, as the quote says, take hold of this great torch, no brief candle, but a great torch of experience, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before I hand it on to the next generation. And I think I have a little bit more time to do that.
Well, and I mean, people just need to read the book to find out how iconic the work that you have done. I mean, we're going to get into some of this as we go along and starting that organization and also the first certification program. And we're going to come to that in a minute. But I also know that in your book, you said, connected with what you're just saying with community, we may never know how our lives might positively impact others. Everything we do and say impacts others and in turn ourselves. Watch what you do and say, and then be prepared to one day experience the impact you may have made upon the world. I mean, that's really profound.
Well, I think when you have lived as long as I have, I'm now 67, you're able to look back with astonishment because I've had over 10,000 students in my teaching career.
Wow.
And during that time, these students returned to me over and over again. Just this week, I met a student today who was in one of my master's degree courses at GW. She's gone on to create tango festivals all over the world. Oh. Now, she happens to be from Latvia, So an Eastern European sees the opportunity of the need for training people in tango and uses her skills learned in our classroom to do that. It's a rare, rare privilege to hear these wonderful stories of success.
Mm. And it is true that you really just don't know, right? I mean, that's one story you know of. God knows how many more there are that you're not even aware of.
Well, I'll give you one other example. This is someone who was never in my classroom. Yesterday, I received an email from a young man in Portland, Oregon. He said, I was in a used bookshop. I found the first edition of my textbook.
Come on.
Signed by Joe Goldblatt.
Yeah.
I read the book and decided immediately I wanted to return to graduate school and earn my postgraduate degree in this field and study with you in Scotland, etc. And he said, the reason I'm motivated to do this is upon leaving university, I took a study abroad tour and I went to Greece and I was standing in the great theater at Epidavros. And he said, I thought, this is what the world needs more of, bringing people together to learn, to think, to celebrate, to rejoice through events. Mm-hmm. And the ironic thing is, my wife Nancy and I, we started our career as mimes. We performed in the theater at Epidavros in 1979.
That's great.
So isn't that remarkable that this same young man was there?
Yeah.
He sees my book and away we go.
Well, and you talk about teaching. I know that in your early 20s, you taught a series of classes for a continuing education program entitled Teaching as a Performing Art. And I love that because to me, Joe, teaching and speaking, there's got to be a sense of that it is performing. There has to be that element, right, in order to really engage the crowd. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, you may remember a company called the Jack Morton Company, which is now called Jack Morton Worldwide.
That's right.
Jack was my mentor, and Jack said to me, Joe, the needs of the audience must be perfectly aligned with the delivery of the event. The needs of the audience must be perfectly aligned with the delivery of the event. So it always starts, Andy, with the needs of the audience. And that's why when I defined special events in my first textbook in 1989, I wrote, a special event is a unique moment in time celebrated with ceremony and ritual to produce specific outcomes. So those outcomes are for the audience.
Yeah. No, I like how you're saying that because I think, and especially in my early days of speaking, I was there to deliver my message. And in the early days, I wasn't necessarily thinking, well, wait a minute. I know this is the organization that hired me or brought me out to speak, but really, what are the people in the chairs? What do they need? And then to start thinking of it that way, it frames it in a different way. How important that is. Also, it was interesting, you talked a great deal about using reflection to improve your professional practice. And I'm wondering, are you talking about therapy? What were you talking about with that? I think that's a really important point for people to be aware of.
I think so many people, when they own a business, as I did for 20 years, are focused on working in the business that they don't have time to work on the business. And working on the business means that you step outside and you reflect upon, am I doing what makes me happy? Am I doing what improves the world? Am I growing? Am I creating something progressive in the community? Am I adding to the body of knowledge in the field in which I'm working? So it's important, I think, from time to time, and biblically, people used to do this every 7 years. It's called a sabbatical.
Right.
That every 7 years you take a step back, you let the land lie fallow. I think that's important in business as well. But I would move it up to every 3 years. And every 3 years, before you start your next strategic plan, you take a step back and you go away and you really think about, am I happy? Am I making others happy? Am I adding to the knowledge in this field?
How long? I mean, I know there's no rule here, but how long are you talking about to get away?
It could be anywhere from a weekend to a week or more. But in my case, it's usually 3 or 4 days. And usually I go to some place lovely that I wanted to always see and would inspire my thinking. And sometimes it was actually connected, Andy, to the launch of a new book, because I've written, as you know, edited, co-authored 38 books in my career.
Yeah.
Each time I start one, there's always this moment of, oh my God, do I have a book inside me? Is there a spine to this book? Is there a theme? And I find if I go away to a creative location, the rest is easy.
It just kind of,
I get inspired.
Yeah. And going alone, right? You got to create that space alone.
And no friends there, no social life, so that you sit down and you're really forced to do some thinking all on your own.
Which I imagine in the very, like, if we imagine doing this today, that's also turning off your phone, not getting onto email. I imagine it's really difficult at first, but then after you go through that rough little period, feeling lonely, all that stuff. Yeah, I believe it creates the space.
Well, it's similar to our Jewish High Holy Day, Yom Kippur, which we'll celebrate in a few days, in which traditionally we fast. Why do we fast? It helps awaken the spirit within, because we're not distracted by other things in the secular world. But the second part of going away and reflecting is then testing your ideas upon a group I call your brain trust. So you appoint people like an Andy Kushner or a Rita Bloom or Angelo Bonita or great people in this industry to read what you have contemplated, what you've written, and ask them 2 questions. Did I miss anything? Mm-hmm. Is there anything that I didn't consider that I should consider? And finally, what is your view? Do you have a reflection? Am I moving in the right direction, etc.? So having that brain trust add to your contemplation, I think, is very helpful.
So, when you're talking about reflecting, perhaps when you're about to launch something new, or, it could lead to launching a whole new business. You also talk about the importance of comprehensive market research prior to. Now, I know for myself, with this podcast, I did not do any market research. I thought, well, if I like it, everyone else is going to like it. And it's working. However, there are still, I think that's really critical, though, to consider that, right? To, like you say, do the research ahead of time. Well, what is the main concept? What does it look like? Especially for people in the event business to monetize whatever their passion is connected to the special event industry, to test out a hypothesis, let's say, first. That's really I don't know that many people do that.
Well, when I started in this business back in the 1970s, I built it and hoped they would come.
Yeah, most of us do.
However, I could have very easily lost my shirt, my trousers, and everything else. So I've always said to my students over the years, market research simply reduces risk. That's all. It doesn't eliminate risk, but it reduces risk. I'll give you an example. When I started in this business, I had no money to advertise, but I knew that, like you, I had the ability to speak and educate and inform and influence. So I ran an all-day seminar at the Hyatt Regency Crystal City Hotel. Mm-hmm. And I invited meeting planners to come. To my surprise, 60 meeting planners showed up to learn about special events. That was my market research, Andy. Because after that, I then
knew
contacted
there was a demand.
them.
You knew there'd be a
Yes,
demand.
they were in the seats. I then contacted them, and I said, based upon what you've heard and what you now know, if you have an event that is occurring soon that you'd like our assistance, please contact us. And that really led to more speeches, more production, more events, because I was positioned then as an authority in their eyes. No one else, was really teaching this. But once again, market research is not rocket science. It doesn't have to be very complex, but any type of research, and that's why I've always said of the 5 phases in event management, research and evaluation are the 2 most important. Because if you don't take time to research, to align the needs of the audience with the event, and if you don't take time to evaluate at the end to see what went well, what could be improved, all the future events are only more difficult. So why not research and evaluate?
Well, in terms of researching, it could feel like an overwhelming task. Are there any almost formulaic or basic principles about how to conduct such research?
There are many different types of research. One is anecdotal, where you simply have a conversation with a large number of people and say, what are your thinking? What are your trends? What are your forecasts, etc.? Another way is further qualitative research, which is a focus panel, where you bring a group of people around a table like this and you have pre-scripted questions and you ask them to talk over and with one another. So you might say, Andy, what do you think? What do you think, Angelo? What do you think, Rita? Etc. Do you agree with Andy? Do you disagree? Do you have a further view? Etc. And then out of that, you try to come to some consensus among the group. Okay. Another type of qualitative research is called ethnographic research. And I bet you do this already at your events. You observe what people are doing, what music they're dancing to, what music they're listening to, how they respond physically to the music, etc. The second type of research is called quantitative, and that's where you add a numerical value. So it could be a survey, right? It could be some sort of a scale that you use. Again, it doesn't have to be difficult. And Andy, the easiest way to accomplish this at low cost or no cost is engage with a university, because all the students are required to do this research.
Okay.
So all you do is go to their instructor and say, I've got a project.
Yeah.
I need it done in the autumn or in the spring. Could you give me a team of students?
What a great idea.
They'll now have access to my clientele, and you'll have a really quality project.
It's interesting. This is making me think. I went to Boston University for a period of time, and I had to almost audition and get into this special class with a major business consultant. It was ODI, Organizational Dynamics Incorporated. And the way that he was very successful, and he would basically have people who worked for him just go in and survey the people who worked for his client to say, what do you think? What do you think? And then he would just write. He told us, I'm sure it was not as easy, but he would write it up and present it to the people. So I think that's great. How did you come to found, connected to all this, ISES, which later became ILEA, which now has over 5,000 members in 38 countries. And then you created, if that wasn't enough, a certification program, CSEP, Certified Special Events Professional. Was there a certain amount of market research even to put something like that together as well?
Once again, when I was on that coach at the second special event, and I felt the presence and the same coach all moving in the same direction, many disparate industries. So, for example, the rental dealers had their own association, the American Rental Association. The caterers had NACE, National Association of Catering Executives. So they were all independent, but none of them were cross-fertilizing, were talking to one another, buying and selling. And I think that was the idea, supply and demand, the invisible hand that the Scotsman Adam Smith, the economist, talks about, that the invisible hand might have needed a little bit of direction to bring these people together, a focus. And that's what we did. And it was funny, at the third special event in Dallas, Texas, I was given permission by the organizers to host an exploratory meeting, we called it, about forming a new organization. And I thought we'd have a very small number. I invited 50 people. I thought I'd be happy if 10 showed up.
Right.
I set the room for 8. I got the smallest room in the hotel.
Yeah.
Over 100 people showed up. They were in chairs in the hallway, etc.
Yeah.
And at that meeting, I proposed that we found an organization entitled the International Special Events Society. I use the term society because I thought it gave it class, kind of
That's great.
a level of doctors, lawyers, etc. You know?
Yeah.
And then I said to the group around the table, I will agree to serve as interim chair, and who will serve as vice chair, who will serve as treasurer, who will serve as head of the bylaws committee, who will head certification committee, and all hands went up. And then I said, I propose we meet again in 90 days. We appointed our first executive director. We approved the first certification program, which I entitled Certified Special Events Professional, CSEP. We set the dues for the membership, and we announced our first convention, which would be in Atlanta 9 months later in the Westin Peachtree Plaza Hotel. And who were the speakers at this convention? The producers of the Super Bowl halftime show.
Oh, wow.
The editor-in-chief, Barbara Tober, of Brides Magazine. And people at that level.
Yeah.
So we just gave it a really strong push, and I guess the rest took care of itself.
You know, many of our past guests, including Brian Raffinelli, Cece Johnson, Colin Cowie, and Lynn Easton, all use Party Slate to showcase their event work and build their businesses. And if you're not familiar with Party Slate, it's a website that inspires people planning events and connects them with the leading event professionals and venues across the country and the world. This is a really, really great website. You can sign up for a free profile where you can upload unlimited photos and events, or you can explore one of their membership options for even more exposure. And Party Slate has launched in 11 cities so far, including Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Dallas, and Miami. And they are coming to a city near you soon. Visit partyslate.com to learn more. Again, you really got to check out partyslate.com. So during your career in events, you said this in your book, I began to notice the logical and essential connections to more established fields of study, such as psychology, sociology, anthropology, theology, and even an emerging field known as technology. And I love that. I think that's also really important to think of it in that way. Can you say more about that?
Well, this came about because after I sold my business, the Wonder Company, I began to get calls from attorneys all over the United States asking me if I would serve as an expert witness for trials. In the 1980s, when this field was developing, there were lots of accidents because there were no professional event planners.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This field began with a caterer and a band leader, maybe a florist.
Yeah.
But they worked independently. There was no event planner, right? And no risk management, health and safety, etc. Since I had written the first textbook in the field, I was the one always invited to be the expert witness at a trial. So I would go to the library after receiving the brief of the trial to prepare for my testimony by doing research, and I immediately saw the linkages to Freud, the linkages to human behavior, the linkages to sociology, the linkages to group behavior, to anthropology, to how individuals grow and develop, to theology, to ritual and ceremony, such as religions have developed over the years. And then, of course, along in the 1990s came something called technology with the birth of the internet.
Right.
And I thought, if you could find a way to link all of these ologies, which is studies, together, you might be able to develop a new field that will have some credibility within the academy, within the universities. And that's how event management was born.
You know, we're all running hard, working really hard. It's scary. You know, I do believe we all have some PTS, some post-traumatic syndrome from two things, from the recession of 2008 and still 9/11. You know, we know how all of this affected us. What would you say about dealing with, you know, rational or irrational fear about the economy And because, I mean, some people are feeling it, maybe some are not, who knows how. And I'm asking you because you were very vulnerable in the book. You talked about a depression you went through, which was not necessarily, I don't think, economics, but it was connected to selling your business. This is before you started your consulting career. You talked about that, and you talked about a way to overcome that depression. But somehow I feel there's a connection here with just in general potential depression, fear. What do you think about all of that? How should we approach this?
Well, there are two kinds of depression, according to the medical community. One is situational depression. The other is clinical.
Okay.
And I don't believe I ever had clinical depression, but I certainly had some depressing situations when the man who owed us money for our firm could not pay, and I had to decide, do I start a new firm? Do I buy back the old firm? Do I do something different? And of course, that's when I returned to university to earn my master's and doctorate and create 27 of the most memorable years of my life as a teacher, professor, researcher. So I would say that those who are concerned about the economic health of their business or their country need to remember two things. All economies are cyclical. That is absolutely proven over 100 years of economic data. And secondly, the owner of the business has the power to control the financial outcome of the business. Here's how. By keeping expenses as low as possible.
Even when times are good.
Even
right?
when times are good.
Stay lean.
Because here, invest when you need to. But remember, you cannot accurately project income or revenue because there are too many external exogenous variables.
Yeah.
There could be another tragic economic downturn. There could be another terrorism attack. There could be a corporation that goes belly up in the town, which has been, let's say, 50% or more of your business. So you cannot accurately project or forecast revenue. What you can do, and you must do, is control expenses.
Yeah. And again, even when times are really good, I mean, I've struggled with that. When there's a lot of money, good cash flow coming in, I've made my mistakes in the past. And I think now ahead, I don't want to live in fear. And look, like you say, it's cyclical. There's going to be another recession, of course. I mean, on average, every 8 years or so. And then there's going to be wonderful times. But I am more and more really understanding and getting lean, staying lean, no matter how good things get.
So, wonderful book I would recommend to your listeners by Naseem Talib. Naseem Talib was a Wall Street trader who in 2007 accurately projected the global financial crisis. He said, this is too good to last, this economy. Something is going to happen. He withdrew all of his funds from Wall Street and was one of the few investors to continue to be successful. He coined the term as a result of his forecasting that there was going to be this terrible economic recession, global recession. He coined the term Black Swan Theory. And what Black Swan Theory proposes is that, as the scientists found in the 19th century when they went to Australia, they assumed that all swans were white, and they saw the first black swans. They thought, well, that's a curious phenomenon. During World War II, we had terrible devastation, but we also invented the jet airplane, and the jet airplane led to tourism on an international scale. September the 11th, terrible devastation, 2001, but improved security systems. Improved
that's
all
right.
over the world, so that hopefully this will not happen again. The internet improved and accelerated communications worldwide. It also has led to some nefarious activity going on. So what Black Swan Theory proposes is that there are going to be, from time to time, these large, sometimes catastrophic events. And we must always be looking to the horizon and asking ourselves, if this should occur, how will we respond? You know that old saying, It's not what life hands you. It's how you respond to what life has handed you.
Absolutely. It's all and perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then also in terms of money, it's all about what you hold on to, right?
Yeah, I think all small business people, and especially in the events industry, should make prudent, wise investments. But they should also be constantly building up what I call a rainy day fund.
Yeah.
Because there will be periods, maybe it's poor health, maybe it's the business takes a turn for the worse for a short time, and cash flow is critically important. The number one reason small event businesses or any event business goes under is not because of lack of creativity. It's because of lack of cash.
Yeah. Yeah. You wrote in your book, as a result of recounting these stories, I find that I am more confident than ever before that the world and tartan that our grandchildren will inherit is filled with more hope and possibility than any previous time in human history. Can you say more about that?
Well, as you know, I'm wearing the Goldblatt tartan.
I see that.
We had our tartan designed by the same company that has 4 royal warrants from the royal family in England. And they came to me and they said, Joe, we would love the honor of designing your tartan. There'll be no charge for the design. Of course, I didn't realize what it was going to cost to have it woven and have the garments made and so on. But the reason I had our tartan woven and registered, we're the only Goldblatt in the 1,000-year history of Scotland to have an official registered tartan, number 11,231, is I wanted to weave our family into our adopted country, into the history of our adopted country. The clans in ancient days wore these tartans for 2 reasons. 1, to link themselves to one another, and 2, to say to their opponents and their enemies that they were confident, that they were ready to mean business if necessary.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm confident the world is going to be even better in the future than it is today. Because I've been teaching young people for the last 27 years, and they are hopeful. They are confident. They are much better educated, much more intellectually developed than our generation ever was. And, Andy, their heart's in the right place. They care more about the environment. This wonderful environmental activist from Sweden who's just come over to the United States. They care more about causes such as homelessness, such as working with the disabled community and other causes. So how could one not be hopeful? Some say that when I was working at universities, it was the golden age of higher education. I'm convinced we're on the cusp of a platinum age, something much more rare. And that's because of the potential for technology to create what has been called events without end. We start online, just as you and I are today with this podcast. And then one day we have the privilege of lifting our glass together in person. And then we continue the relationship online for the rest of our lives. So I think we're about to enter what I call the age of adventure, events without end.
Love that. Well, thank you so much, Joe, for being on the show. It's and I want to thank you on behalf of the industry, seriously, for what you have done, starting the first major society for events, which is now called ILEA, the CSEP program, the certification program. You develop curriculums. I mean, you are a true pioneer in every sense of the word. And what you've done for the industry is just astounding. Thank you.
My pleasure. And if your listeners would like to purchase my book, I would be very happy to personally inscribe it, sign it for them. They can simply visit www.joegoldblatt.com, www.joegoldblatt.com.
Wonderful. And all of this we'll have in the show notes too. Thanks again, Joe.
Thank you, Andy. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Joe Goldblatt. Be sure to check out his website at joegoldblatt.scot, S-C-O-T. Again, joegoldblatt.scot. His social media handles are Joe Jeff Goldblatt. All of this is in the show notes at our website of theweddingbiz.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues. Also, giving us a great review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts is wonderfully appreciated by me, yours truly. And don't forget to listen Wednesday to our follow-on segment with each interview, The Next Level, in which I have a guest co-host. And together we tease out some of the highlights of the interview to help break them down into specific tactics and tips for you to use to raise your own business to the next level. And this week's guest co-host is going to be Jennifer Stein, co-founder and editor-in-chief of Destination I Do magazine, which can be found on newsstands in all 50 states and 12 countries. Jennifer is just always a blast to have on the next level. Those of you who have been listening know what I'm talking about. And next week's interview is a real fun one for me. It is with Robert Sherman, CEO of Washington Talent. Robert has just so much insight to give about music and entertainment for events, but also we talk about finding and forming a partnership. Really interesting conversation, a lot of fun. So be sure to follow us at The Wedding Biz on both Facebook and Instagram, especially Instagram, again, at The Wedding Biz. And let's not forget to thank our sponsor, Party Slate. Check them out at partyslate.com. Again, be sure to check them out at partyslate.com. We'll catch you next week on The Wedding Biz.